Explosive testimony rocks week 2 of the federal sex trafficking and racketeering trial against Sean Diddy Combs. More allegations of abuse of Cassandra Ventura, choking, money to stay silent, and even a former employee testifying to the inner workings of Sean Combs' world. I'm going to be speaking with our Law and Crime reporter Elizabeth Milner to break down all of today's dramatic courtroom moments. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Well, the federal sex trafficking and racketeering trial of Sean Diddy Combs took a dramatic turn as we enter week number 2. Two key witnesses delivered explosive testimony detailing allegations of violence, threats, manipulation at the hands of the hip-hop mogul. Former Daddy Kane member Dawn Richard returned to the stand, doubling down on her shocking claim that she witnessed Diddy attack his then-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura Fine. The jury also heard from Kerry Morgan. This is Cassie's former best friend, who described multiple incidents in which she claims to have seen Diddy physically assault Cassie. And interestingly, Morgan testified that she and Cassie no longer friends. We're going to explain the surprising reason why in just a moment. But we also heard from Combs' former personal assistant, too, towards the end of the day. And let's not forget what we're talking about here. So Diddy is facing serious federal charges: racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, transportation to engage in prostitution, namely that he allegedly operated this criminal enterprise that was engaged in a pattern of abusing women for years, including forcing them into these coerced sexual performances. He's facing potentially life in prison if he's convicted of the top charge. Now, for all of the dramatic moments from inside the courtroom and maybe what happened outside the courtroom, I want to bring in our eyes, our ears, Law and Crime reporter Elizabeth Milner, because as we know, there are no cameras in that courtroom. There's no audio recording in that courtroom, but we have Elizabeth Milner. Who else would you want to report for us than Elizabeth Milner? Elizabeth, so good to see you. Thank you so much for taking the time. So, look, today's testimony, some pretty shocking details, and we're going to get to that in a minute. But first, I always have to ask you, what was the atmosphere like today? What was Sean Combs' demeanor like today? And we'll get into a little bit more of the jury and how they were reacting to each of the testimony. But what was the atmosphere like? What was the scene like? What was Sean Combs like?
Well, the atmosphere has always been how it has been this entire time. A lot of interest, just genuinely in this case overall, and not just from us in the media, a lot of people from the public too. I get here around like 7 o'clock, between 7 o'clock and 7:30 every morning. And for the most part, there's already a pretty long line of not just, again, reporters, but people from the public who just want to get a glimpse of kind of what is all going on, especially given that there are no cameras for this trial. So a lot of people want to either get inside that courtroom or at least kind of watch it kind of similarly to a movie theater show downstairs in the overflow room, where I've heard there's been like a lot of commotion as far as just people who kind of like to be chatty during this. A lot of people are just kind of oohing and awing just at the testimony, kind of similar to how people might react during like a sports game or a basketball game, that type of thing. So yeah, there's a lot of interest in this case overall. A lot of people just want to either get inside that courtroom, get inside just to see Diddy, possibly his family. But as far as inside the actual courtroom today where I was, it was kind of the same as usual. It looked a little different as far as, you know, the defendant's side, just kind of what that all looked like. What we do know is that one of Diddy's childhood friends was still in that courtroom, but as far as just his extended family or just his mother, his daughters, his sons, that wasn't what we saw today in this courtroom. And I had mentioned on Friday, you know, a source had told me that the girls, the twins, had prom over the weekend, which we saw some photos of them. So it might just be that a lot of the family just went back to see these activities and that type of thing. But it really didn't deter Diddy at all. Diddy still was laser focused on what was going on in his trial. The more I go to these court hearings and go to trial every single day, I'm starting to kind of realize that Diddy, even though he's in the predicament that he's in right now, and that's he's still behind bars, he's still kind of running the show, maybe possibly similarly to how he was running his business. He is very much not a passive defendant. He's not one of those defendants who's just sitting there letting his lawyers handle everything. In some aspects, he might be, right, because they know the law, they know all of that stuff. But as far as just him participating in his own defense, he definitely is still doing that. He's still jotting down notes, passing them off to his attorneys. He's still just being focused on the trial, the testimony that's being given. He's focused on what his attorneys are asking. And I've seen a couple peeks here and there as far as just the jury's reaction to everything. So as far as just the tone overall in the courtroom, it's still business as usual. Obviously, from Sean Combs' perspective, this is kind of the fight for his life as he's trying to, probably on his end, probably just wants all these charges dismissed or at least to be acquitted of these charges. But for the most part, the tone is very much business as usual. A lot of us were expecting what would the cross-examination of Don Richard look like, and that was kind of what, in essence, it was definitely this morning.
Hey, I want to take a quick minute to thank Upside for sponsoring our coverage of Sean Diddy Combs' trial. Now, Upside is amazing. It is a free app that gets you cash back on daily essentials like gas, groceries. I pump my gas, I can use Upside. I go out to lunch, I can use Upside. Maybe I get something at a convenience store, I can use Upside. And why not get cash back when doing all these things, right? And yes, this is actual, real cash back. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you transfer right into your bank account. So once you have the free Upside app, you claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. You pay as usual using a debit or credit card. You follow the steps on the app, you get paid. So to find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on screen, and make sure to use our promo code LC Sidebar. You'll get a special one-time offer of 35 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. That's promo code LC Sidebar for a one-time special offer of an extra 35 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Yeah, even the sketch artist that's in the court, and we always get the updated sketches from every day, depicted Sean Combs taking notes during Don Richard's testimony. So let's talk about Don Richard. This is the former member of the group Danity Kane, created by Sean Combs, signed to his Bad Boy record label. She filed her own lawsuit against Sean Combs. She was back on the stand. She began her testimony on Friday. We heard more about her allegedly observing this abuse that she inflicted, that he allegedly inflicted on Cassandra Ventura. What did she say more about this alleged abuse that she observed?
Yeah, so on Friday when we left testimony, Don Richard was still under direct, so they kind of picked back up from direct this morning. And pretty much what she left on Friday was that she was talking about this incident involving an egg skillet, something that's kind of been deemed the egg skillet incident as far as court goes today. And it was a situation where she had witnessed Diddy being physically assault his then girlfriend, of course, that being Cassie Ventura, and said at the day after this incident had happened that they were in the recording studio downstairs at Diddy's home, and essentially Diddy brought Don Richard and her then bandmate Kalina Harper some flowers, and essentially said something along the lines of, "Don't say anything because where I'm from, people go missing." So when we left off on Friday, Mark Agnifilo was just like, "Hold up, objection." That objection actually ended up being overruled. So we kind of picked up from where that was. And so today, Don Richard was pretty much kind of picking back up for the aftermath of this egg skillet incident, where Diddy had said that this relationship was something of passion with him and Cassie, and that if they were to say anything, they being Don Richard and Kalina Harper, allegedly, that people go missing. And so Don said that she was actually scared and shocked by this statement. And she said, even after the aftermath of this incident, that she continued seeing Cassie and Diddy together. They were seen together at hotels, in the studio, at their homes. And she says that Dawn says that she saw Cassie pretty frequently, and she also said that she saw Diddy be violent with Cassie very frequently. She says Dawn saw Diddy punch and drag, and even instances of kicking Cassie, and she was asked what prompted this violence. Dawn, because while she was on the stand, she's very soft-spoken. She seemed a little bit nervous just overall about testifying today, and so she was very soft-spoken when she was saying these words, and she said that this violence would be prompted just at random. She said Cassie would just be speaking up for herself, and then something like this would happen. Dawn said that Cassie has a very quiet demeanor, something that I kind of had witnessed when she was testifying today, and that Diddy just wasn't having that as far as her pretty much essentially speaking up for herself. And then there was other instances where she was asked, who was all there when you witnessed Diddy being physically violent with Cassie? And she mentioned names such as Har Pierre, who is the former president of Bad Boy. She mentioned Mia, who had worked for Diddy. She mentioned Capricorn Clark, also a former employee of Diddy. She also mentioned D-Rock and Bonds. These are two individuals who we know work security for Diddy. We've seen a couple of exhibit photos of them, and they're just kind of like their driver's license photos, nothing crazy like group shots or anything just like that yet. And so then she was asked what was the first incident of violence that you had seen by Diddy, and she said that 2009 was the first incident she saw this. And so then that's when we start to see the exhibit photos again, that those being of D-Rock, those being of Bonds. And she said that this violence kind of continued while Don Richard worked with Diddy and Dirty Money. And so the defense was kind of trying to point out the differences between her time with Danity Kane, her time with Dirty Money, and we'll get to that when we kind of talk about the cross. But as far as her time working with Dirty Money, she had said that was from the period of 2009 to 2011, so about a 2-year period. She said when she was asked if Bonds or D-Rock did anything after this violence, and she said that they essentially didn't do anything to kind of help Cassie. She said she, being Dawn, saw injuries to Cassie's eyes, her legs, her arms. She said essentially that Cassie would cover up her injuries with makeup, something that Cassie herself testified to while she was on the stand. She mentioned another incident, and this was an incident over up in Central Park, just, blocks and blocks up from here, where she witnessed Diddy punch Cassie in the face with a closed fist at this festival at Central Park where Dirty Money was going to be performing. She said after this incident that Cassie came into the bathroom. She was crying while Dawn and Kalina Harper, who was, again, her then bandmate on Dirty Money, were getting ready for a performance. And Dawn says that she saw Cassie's eyes swelling, and she being Cassie, just put on some makeup and then put on her sunglasses. And Dawn said that she'd stayed with Cassie for support after this incident. Then we see an exhibit photo of Cassie, Dawn, and Kalina Harper all at this festival, all up in Central Park. All of the women were with their sunglasses, but this picture was a little different than some of the other exhibit photos that Cassie herself has turned over to the government, where we couldn't necessarily see the injuries under her sunglasses because it was kind of just like a group photo. Other people were around, but you could tell that Kalina, Cassie, and Don Richard were all wearing sunglasses. And she was asked, why are you guys all wearing sunglasses? And Dawn responded, it was in solidarity of Cassie, essentially. Then there was another incident the following year in 2010 that Don Richard had witnessed, where she saw Diddy punch Cassie in the stomach. This was at a dinner that they were all having together. Celebrities were there. She had mentioned Usher was there and Nia was there, but she had also mentioned, again, a lot of Diddy's employees themselves, such as Harpier, again, president of Bad Boy. You had D-Rock there, who worked security. Kalina Harper there, are part of Dirty Money. Nia there, she worked for security, she worked with Diddy. And then Bonds, who was part of security, were all there. Then we see an exhibit photo of Harpier, again, him being president of Bad Boy. And she was asked a little bit about Harpier's role and whether or not Harpier was her boss, but she had clarified that she had reported to Sean Combs, even though Harpier was the president of Bad Boy at the time. And then she said nobody intervened during the situation. So as they're all driving back, they were on a Sprinter van. On the Sprinter van were Kalina, Dawn, Cassie, Diddy, and D-Rock. D-Rock was the one who was driving, and that Cassie actually confronted Diddy about punching her in the stomach, essentially saying that it was embarrassing that he had did this in front of other people. And Don Richard recalled Diddy slapping Cassie in the mouth, and that Cassie just looked out of the window for the rest of the ride. Don Richard was asked specifically questions about Cassie's career, as far as that Cassie just wanted to do more in career, says that Don supported this, and that she even offered to write songs for Cassie during this, but that Diddy just didn't like that Kalina Harper and Don Richard were essentially talking to Cassie. Diddy had told Cassie when Diddy's ready, then that's when they could work on Cassie's career. And so I could see where the prosecution was kind of going with this, as far as asking Don Richard these types of questions, kind of painting the picture that Cassie had no other choice but to continue on living this type of life, knowing that her career was kind of in the hands of Diddy. So I could see kind of where they were going with this. But Don Richard recalled one specific moment where Diddy told her that he didn't like that Kalina and Don were speaking to Cassie. He said something along the lines of, "Stay the F out of my relationship. You mother effers don't know real work." And so Don had said just kind of how Diddy was just so kind of mean to them when speaking with them. She was asked about Diddy's drug use and whether or not she saw or witnessed Diddy doing drugs. She says she has, including drugs like weed, ketamine, coke, Molly, ecstasy, and said that a lot of these drugs were brought often to the studio or even at Diddy's house. And she said that these drugs were actually delivered by a man named One Stop. We all saw an exhibit photo of this man named One Stop, because at first when I was jotting down my notes, I was like, what is, but that was actually, I guess, his moniker, One Stop, and that One Stop was kind of a play on that you're one stop away and you can get the drugs, that type of thing. So it was a little funny kind of knowing that nickname behind it. But Don Richard had talked about how One Stop had delivered coke, Plan B, weed, Molly, essentially everything to Diddy at the studio. And Dawn had said that she saw Diddy put drugs in his Louis Vuitton pouch, something that other people have testified to, something that when the HSI agent had testified on Friday that we had seen inside Diddy's room when he was arrested, and Dawn said that Diddy would carry drugs in this Louis Vuitton pouch, and he would carry these drugs domestically and internationally. She was asked, did you observe Diddy give drugs to Kalina and possibly Cassie too? And she said that she did. She was asked about weapons, whether or not Diddy had weapons on him while he was in the studio. She said she did see Diddy with a handgun in the studio around the 2009-2010 time frame. He normally would carry this handgun in his lower waist or even his back. He would even carry this gun to the club as well too, but D-Rock and Bonds also carried guns for Diddy because they worked security. So then towards the end of her testimony, she was asked a little bit about why she parted ways with Diddy, and said that she continued to even stay in contact with Diddy after parting ways. Dawn said that if she didn't pick up the phone, the phone situation, that he would just call and call and call, and if no one was answering, then he'd get assistants to call. Dawn said she experienced that for herself, where she said that his assistants and management would call her if she wasn't answering Diddy's calls himself. She says that she stayed pleasant, and this is something that I thought was interesting, Jesse, mainly because, for the longest time, myself would just think that as far as Diddy's relationship with Don Richard specifically, that it was a special one, because I was a huge fan of Making the Band back when I was younger, and I just remember Diddy specifically kind of having his eyes on Dawn just as she would be the superstar, and he kind of propped her up and propelled her up, and so we all thought that, they had a great relationship. So even it was surprising when Dawn had filed her lawsuit against Diddy a few months back, and even her talking about it under testimony today, she said that she stayed pleasant with Diddy essentially because she was scared of him, and said that she just wanted to exchange pleasantries, even referred to him as bro, something that I think she doesn't necessarily mean, but just said it because I think she just wanted to continue to maintain that relationship in a professional way, but still witnessing all of this. So I thought that was an interesting moment that she had talked about today. She said that she didn't disclose the violence because she was told not to disclose this by Diddy and as well as even Harve Pierre. But she said everything kind of changed for her when Cassie took a stand and told her truth and that was Cassie filing her lawsuit. Obviously, everything kind of happened afterwards, and then she said that she, being Dawn, referred to her lawsuit specifically as something that referred to herself, as far as just all the allegations that she put in, because a lot of the allegations she put in her civil claim just weren't necessarily talked about during her testimony today, especially under direct. But she says that this lawsuit is still pending, and she says she's not aware of any type of settlement in the case so far. She said that she wasn't expecting compensation, which is interesting because under a cross-examination, she said she was expecting compensation as far as the time that she had worked, but under direct, she said she wasn't expecting compensation, but she was essentially just expecting justice, and that just wrapped up her direct testimony. Right. So they touched upon a lot of key points, I think, to kind of help solidify Cassie's claims, but when I tell you the cross-examination was a cross-examination to watch. It definitely was.
Hey everybody, this is another Law and Crime legal alert. If you received Depo-Provera birth control shots and were later diagnosed with a brain or spinal tumor called meningioma, you may be eligible for a lawsuit. That's right, Morgan & Morgan is investigating claims that patients weren't properly warned about this risk. It's free to check, just takes a few minutes. You don't pay unless they win. So scan the QR code on screen, click the link below, or head over to forthepeople.com/LCDepo to see if you qualify. The federal trial of Sean Diddy Combs erupted in bombshell testimony Tuesday. Claims of hush money for apparent sex tapes, bruised bodies, and alleged Trump Tower tryst. I'm going to be talking with our Law and Crime reporter Elizabeth Milner to break down the top moments from day 7 of testimony. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Well, the federal trial of Sean Diddy Combs certainly took a turn Tuesday because you had witnesses who dropped these explosive allegations from Cassandra Ventura's mother talking about this alleged $20,000 payment that Sean Combs had demanded in exchange for returning or deleting this sex tape. Unbelievable testimony. Then you had a former insider who revealed this dark night involving guns and Suge Knight. You had an alleged revenge mission. Then I didn't even mention the testimony of this purported male sex worker who was hired to have sex with Cassandra Ventura in front of Combs. Yes, so Combs faces these charges of sex trafficking, racketeering, transporting individuals for purposes of prostitution. He's pleaded not guilty. The trial continued into day 7 today as prosecutors build their case, portraying the Bad Boy Records founder as this manipulative enforcer who used fear, money, violence to control those around him. So to help us get that special inside scoop on everything that went on inside that courtroom, I want to bring on our very own Law&Crime reporter, Elizabeth Milner. Our eyes, our ears for what is happening there day in and day out. Elizabeth, thanks so much for taking the time. Now, we're going to get into David James' testimony, the former personal assistant of Sean Combs. He continued his testimony. But how could I not start off with Cassie Ventura's mother, Regina Ventura, right? If Cassie Ventura is the star witness in this case, having her mother testify, unbelievable. Now, she talked about this moment that Diddy demanded money for one of Cassie's sex tapes. Can you talk to us about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So this kind of went down in 2011, so nearly 14 years ago at this point, and it was around the holiday time that this happened. And it was kind of a little bit in relation to the whole Kid Cudi incident and just Cassie kind of pursuing Kid Cudi in a romantic fashion after Diddy introduced the two in the studio. Diddy got upset that Cassie was in this really very short relationship with Kid Cudi. And so around this time frame, again, this being December of 2011, Cassie came home for the holidays, something that her mother, Regina, had said that she often does. She always comes home around the holiday time. So then we see one of the exhibits around that time frame, this 2 days before Christmas of 2011, so December 23rd of 2011. We see an email that we had seen previously when Cassie was testifying, and that was the email sent to Cassie's mother, Regina, as well as Capricorn Clark, who had worked with Diddy at this time frame. And Cassie wrote in this email, the threats that have been made towards me by Sean Combs are he's going to release 2 explicit sex tapes of me, one on Christmas and maybe right before or right after, and another one sometime soon after that. He also said that he will be having someone hurt me and Scott being Kid Cudi, physically, and that it wouldn't be at the hands of it wouldn't be at the hands of Diddy. And so when Regina was testifying today just about this, Jesse, she was saying things like, the sex tapes threw me. I knew that he was trying to hurt my daughter. So what she did was she took out a $20,000 home equity loan because Diddy essentially demanded this, because Regina said that Diddy was angry that he had spent money on Cassie and Cassie was with someone else. And so Regina had this this loan drafted. Then she got a check after she was able to deposit in her checking account. Got a check, sent it to the Bad Boy account. However, the money was returned to Regina Ventura just a couple days later. According to Regina, the money came back about 4 to 5 days later, and there was no type of conversation with Diddy just about this money even returning into her possession. But from Regina's standpoint, during this, she said that she was scared about her daughter's safety, and that's why she essentially complied with this demand. And so, it was kind of a big sticking point throughout her testimony today, something that the defense on their end, because we saw some arguments outside of the presence of the jury, that they didn't want this testimony in today. They didn't want a jury to hear it. But lo and behold, this testimony definitely kind of changed things up, possibly for just how everyone's kind of interpreting the whole situation, how Cassie is involved, and especially with Regina kind of verifying that this kind of went down. But it was definitely a huge sticking point when Regina was on that stand.
I mean, we knew that Regina was going to take the stand as a form of corroborating Cassie Ventura's testimony. Cassandra Ventura basically testified that she was a victim of Sean Combs' sex trafficking, that she was coerced into these sexual episodes, that she was beaten, that she was threatened. And to have Regina take the stand, we knew she was going to be a form of corroborating testimony. I didn't expect this, the alleged $20,000 payment. The reason I say so much about corroborating testimony is I also understand there was a discussion regarding her taking photos of injuries of her daughter or something of that fashion. Can you talk to us a little bit more about the injuries to Cassie?
I can only imagine how hard it was for Regina to testify about this, because in this we're seeing exhibit photos of Cassie around this time with bruises on her body, something that she had testified to while she was under direct examination and even cross-examination as well too. But as far as Regina specifically goes, we were shown exhibits, photos again around this time frame, that being in 2011, and they showed Cassie kind of posed up. These photos were taken by Regina herself. Cassie had her head shaved at this point, and Regina made it a point to kind of point out to everyone that Cassie had her head shaved from around 2009 to about 2011. And again, these photos were taken around the 2011 time frame. But in that time frame, this was really the first time Cassie had even spoken to her mother about the physical violence that she endured at the hands of her then boyfriend, that then boyfriend obviously being Sean Combs, aka Diddy. And so Regina also brought up just a blind item that she had previously seen on the internet. A blind item is something that, you know, in my personal time, I do kind of like to look at, and essentially it's just kind of like gossip about celebrities, but they don't necessarily use the names, and it's just ways to kind of get in gossip that sometimes can be true, sometimes it's a little fabricated, a little over the top. But in this specific case, Regina recalled seeing just a blind item about Cassie getting beaten in a car by Diddy, and then privately an exhibit photo was shown of somebody named Mia, somebody that who previously had worked for Diddy. This was shown privately, so we in the gallery, and I don't even believe that the jurors even saw this photo. But as far as just the photos that we did see today in court, it was just more of those bruised photos, more of the photos that Cassie again had bruises on her body. She was posing for her mom, and her mom kind of kept these photos, I guess kind of as a way for instances, possibly kind of like this one, where just if something were to happen, they have these photos to kind of corroborate Cassie's stories. But some of were different photos that we had seen earlier in the days of testimony, and then some of them were newer photos as well too. But I think they kind of really hit home with the jury there, just about everything that Regina saw her daughter go through during this time.
And I will tell you, I think the prosecution has done quite an exceptional job at proving there was physical violence against Cassandra Ventura. I mean, even the defense seemed to concede that there was domestic violence, but you couple the photographs, the testimony, both of Cassandra Ventura and supporting witnesses, the 2016 tape, definitely, I think the jury can make the assumption or go to the conclusion that she was physically abused. It does become a question, is that sex trafficking? Is that racketeering? That's a separate legal question. Now, did she also testify about a phone incident? If so, what's that about?
Yeah, so the phone incident just happened about 5 years later from the 2011 incident. So that means 11 plus 5, 2016. And so around this time was Cassie's 30th birthday. And so Regina had traveled from Connecticut to Los Angeles at the time where Cassie was living on the West Coast to essentially celebrate her daughter's birthday. And so, but what ended up happening was that Regina actually called the police. Why did she call the police? Because Diddy had taken Cassie's phone. Regina got upset about this whole incident, so she just immediately called the police after Cassie had told her about what happened. So what ended up happening on Regina's end is she got into an argument with Diddy outside of Cassie's apartment building. We saw an exhibit photo of Cassie's apartment building at the time where she lived on the 17th story. And she said during this argument with Diddy that D-Rock was present. His real name is Damian Butler, and that's what Regina had referred to him as, his government name, that being Damian Butler, as opposed to D-Rock, the name that a lot of people have used while they've been testifying throughout this trial. And during this, D-Rock was kind of being the middleman in all of this, essentially trying to possibly de-escalate the situation, or at least at the bare minimum, just trying to protect Diddy from the wrath of Regina, because Regina said that while this was happening, that Diddy was holding Cassie's phone, D-Rock was in the middle of it, trying to kind of break up everything, and that Regina was admitting that she was trying to hit Diddy during this, because that's how essentially furious that she was. And so what ended up happening is that Diddy later gave Regina Cassie's phone back, but then what he ended up doing was taking Cassie's car instead. And so I think this kind of played into the prosecution's argument that, you know, if something were to happen, that Diddy would take things away from Cassie, such as her phone in one instance, such as her car in another instance. And so Regina said essentially that they ended up still celebrating Cassie's birthday around this time frame. But the thing is that Diddy wasn't there, so there was no Diddy at this birthday celebration or anything like that, especially after kind of the events that occurred. And even just looking at this time frame, this August 2016 was just a few months after the hotel incident that happened at the Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles. And so I think what the prosecution was doing was, again, trying to kind of drive home the point that if something were to happen, if Diddy didn't like something, that essentially he would take things away from Cassie. Sometimes her phone, again, sometimes her car. But again, at the end of the day, Regina kind of went into mama bear mode while she was even on the stand for the most part today, Jesse. She appeared very honest. She appeared like a compelling witness, kind of verifying some of the things that her daughter had said while on the witness stand just last week. And so I thought her testimony was possibly very powerful, especially kind of talking about how she didn't know about the physical violence that she endured by Diddy, or even just some of the things that she may have witnessed. For example, this phone incident that happened in August of 2016. And so I found her to be a very compelling witness. She appeared forthcoming while she was on the stand, again, even admitting that she at one point was so mad that she even tried to hit Diddy at that time. And so, yeah, I think she made for a very compelling witness while on the witness stand. And I know you might ask me a little bit about cross coming up, but unfortunately, everyone, there was no cross-examination. Probably a good move by the defense, because what type of questions would they end up asking essentially a victim's mom, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think they were probably of the opinion either they're not going to deny what she's saying, right? They've accepted a lot of this alleged violence, saying it's domestic violence but doesn't amount to a federal crime, or they're of the opinion if we cross-examine her in such a way, perhaps it could turn the jury against us. And there's nothing we can gain from cross-examining what she had to say. So very strategic for them not to cross-examine her, but important witness nonetheless. Not the only important witness who took the stand. I understand that a man named Sheree Hayes took the stand, who goes by the stage name The Punisher. Now, talk to us about who this person is, because I understand he was hired by Diddy and Cassie. I understand he told the court about one specific sexual encounter with Cassie and Diddy that happened at the Trump Tower. So he was this male performer who was hired to have sexual relations with Cassie. What happened at the Trump Tower?
So when Sheree Hayes was initially called to the witness stand, I was thinking, maybe he's somebody of Diddy's employees. We're just going to talk about his time working with Diddy, because when he had walked inside the courtroom today, Jesse, he was wearing a suit. He had a nice long tie on. He appeared very professional. And so when he got on the witness stand and said that he was a male exotic dancer, I think a lot of people were just like, oh, okay, he's one of the people. And then that's when we get into the nickname, The Punisher, a nickname that surprisingly he has had since his school days, essentially when he was playing sports and that type of thing. But while he was on the witness stand today, he was really kind of describing essentially just the fantasies that were being played out in these hotel rooms. And so for this, he was paid in the fall of 2012, paid to create a sexy erotic scene. He said he had met Cassie and Diddy after working at some type of club event. And then a woman had called him essentially saying that it was her birthday and that her husband said that she could hire a dancer. And so the Punisher, or Sheree Hayes, thought initially that he was going to be at a bachelorette party dancing for like a group of women to get them excited for the bachelorette. But then when he went to this hotel, what ended up happening was a woman met him in a bathrobe. She was wearing a wig. And she opened the door, and he later revealed that this woman was Cassandra Ventura, aka Cassie. And so this woman, while he was on the phone with her, because he said he had spoken to a woman either on the phone or through text messages, this woman asked to meet him at the Trump Tower and just come straight to the room. He thought it was going to be just $200 for a 45-minute show. And then again, he was greeted by Cassie at the door, again, thinking that he was expecting a crowd of bachelorettes who were excited for this type of performance. But again, it was just Cassie inside that room at first. And so he was told by Cassie during this that her husband wanted to her husband wanted her to put baby oil on each other and just kind of rub baby oil to kind of create this type of scene and play out this fantasy. And during this time, Cassie had handed him $800. So he was told one stipulation. He was told specifically not to acknowledge the husband or say anything to him. And then he had noticed that all the furniture was covered in sheets. Over to the side, there was some water. Over to the side, there was some baby oil. And that Cassie and the Punisher essentially just kind of rubbed and applied baby oil onto each other. During this, he says that a nude man came out, and this man who was essentially nude came out. He had Astroglide, and he recognized the Astroglide because he's an exotic dancer, or something that he says he's used before. And this man had come out. Again, he's nude in this situation, but his face was covered. That was the thing. And during this time, the husband, per se, was pleasuring himself while giving Cassie essentially direction. And these directions and these points that he was saying was move to the side or position your bodies a certain way. And so the Punisher said, or Sheree Hayes, excuse me, he had said that this encounter lasted about 25 to 30 minutes. He didn't know it was Diddy being this husband during this incident, until later on. And so he said after this entire encounter, he actually got more money. He got $1,200 after this, and then he was contacted again and again and again, about 8 to 12 more times. And during this, he initially thought Cassie was a woman named Janet because this was the alias that she was using whenever she had contacted Sheree or the Punisher to kind of play out this fantasy, essentially. But that's kind of what it went down at the Trump Tower during the fall of 2012.
Day 8 of Sean Diddy Combs' federal sex trafficking trial delivered some more explosive testimony. His former executive assistant took the stand, alleging he picked up drugs for Combs, set up hotel rooms with supplies, endured constant threats, and we found out what federal authorities found in Diddy's mansion. We've got all the explosive details from inside the courtroom. We're going to be talking with Law&Crime's reporter Elizabeth Milner to break it all down. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. The federal sex trafficking trial of Sean Diddy Combs took yet even more explosive turns today. Day 8, as his former executive assistant George Kaplan took the stand, revealing some stunning details about alleged drug pickups, secret hotel room setups, more alleged threats to employees. Meanwhile, prosecutors, they teased a major witness for tomorrow, none other than rapper Kid Cudi. He's had quite the past with Combs' ex-girlfriend Cassandra Ventura, allegations of arson, right? Talking about a blown-up car. But first, Kaplan. So the last witness to take the stand today, his testimony painted a picture of Combs as this demanding boss who allegedly used his assistant to procure drugs, set up hotel rooms with supplies, even repeatedly threatened his job. We're going to get into all that. We're going to get into a lot more. But for this, I'm not going to do it alone. I'm going to bring on right now Law&Crime's reporter Elizabeth Milner, who's been inside that courtroom in the Southern District of New York for every second of the testimony, including for today. Elizabeth, great to see you. So I want to start off with what's perhaps the most shocking claim. You have Diddy's former assistant, this is George Kaplan, former executive assistant. He testified that he actually picked up drugs for Diddy. Can you tell us what exactly he said about that? Because again, this is important for the racketeering charge. If we're talking about Combs operating a criminal enterprise and he was using his assistants and his bodyguards to further criminal activity or provide supplies for criminal activity and cover it up, these are the people you want to hear about. So what exactly did he say about picking up drugs for Diddy?
Well, absolutely, Jesse. And you know what? I'm just going to kind of tell you and take it a little bit back just 2 hours earlier, just because outside of the presence of the jury, so right while Dr. Hughes was testifying, they were dismissed for lunch. Then we had this moment again outside of the presence of the jury where we were first introduced to George Kaplan, us in the gallery, us in the press. Obviously, the prosecution and both the defense were, we see George Kaplan taking the stand and we're like, okay, what's about to happen? Well, let me just tell you, Jesse, he invoked his Fifth Amendment right of self-incrimination outside of the presence of the jury, and in exchange exchange for that, he was actually given a court-ordered immunity deal, which is why maybe he's being so forthcoming about just all the everything that he had to do as far as responsibility goes while he was on the job and under the employment of Diddy for that 2-year time period. And so whenever he got on the stand again, George Kaplan, for the most part, he is kind of medium built, a little stocky. And when I had noticed him taking the stand outside of the presence of the jury, I saw him and Diddy kind of look at each other. George Kaplan smiled at him, Diddy smiled back. And so there seemed like familiarity about him to him. So when he announced himself as a former executive assistant of Diddy and working for the Combs Enterprise per se, then I was like, okay, he's another staff member, because sometimes you just never know who these people are and who's going to be testifying in this trial. And so as far as George Kaplan, today he was questioned by Maureen Comey. So he used to actually work at Nickelodeon for about a 7-month period, and then he moved over to the Combs Enterprise in December of 2013. So he had worked for Diddy's company, and this was a holding company, that being Combs Enterprise, and he said it was essentially a holding company that oversees all of Diddy's other companies, which includes liquor and lifestyle, television, even clothing, and I presume he means the Sean John line. But he worked under this Combs Enterprise, that he calls it, from December of 2013 to December of 2015. So he says initially for a 10-month period, he was actually hired as an executive assistant to the chief operating officer, and that again was about a 10-month period. Then afterwards, his next role at his next role at the job was an executive assistant to the chairman. Now, who was the chairman? That being none other than Sean Combs himself. And so that promotion happened in September of 2014. He said one of the people that he reported to was Christina Coram, who he calls KK, who Cassie has called KK, and who other staff members who have also testified also refer to her as KK. And so he said that he had, for the most part, worked at Diddy's LA home, and this is the one on 200 Mapleton over in Los Angeles. He said his responsibilities included carrying bags of clothes, medicine, food, computers, iPads. He organized Diddy's home so that way things would be up in top shape for the chairman, and that's who his boss was essentially. He said his responsibilities changed after Diddy pretty much started trusting George a little bit more, and that's when he would be working with Diddy at the studio. He'd be working very long hours into the night sometimes after those studio sessions. He would set up hotel rooms where you can kind of see me leading to where I'm going next. But as far as just his work overall, he said sometimes he would be working 80 to 100 hours per week. Now, mind you, the normal hours for us regular folks is just about 40 hours per week and maybe some overtime here and there. But for George Kaplan, he described pretty much working essentially sometimes 24/7. And so he says the day normally started around 9:30 in the morning, but sometimes they would go as long as 6 or 7 a.m. And he said that, again, some of his responsibilities were just making sure that Diddy had everything ready to use. Those include unpacking the bags, bringing him car chargers ready to go, and grabbing him food. And he said he had other assistants, so it wasn't just George Kaplan working as an assistant. There were 4 other assistants as well too. But as far as just kind of the hotel rooms, and that's kind of where I was leading up to a little bit, his duties included unpacking hotel bags, and those included clothes, those included speakers, they included other things like candles, liquor, baby oil, and even Astroglide. And so as far as who bought the supplies, George said that he did buy these supplies. He used a corporate credit card, and he said he needed a little more than an hour to essentially set up this room. And he was instructed to do so either by Christina Coram or he was instructed to do so by Diddy himself. So he said that he set up hotel rooms in Los Angeles and New York and Miami. He mentioned that he set up a hotel here in Trump Hotel and here in New York City. He set up a hotel room at the Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles, a hotel that feels like we're very familiar with at this point, as well as other hotels too. And he said these hotels were booked under the name Frank Black, and he says that was actually in reference to Biggie, who kind of sometimes used the pseudonym of Frank White. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting tidbit over there. But as far as these hotel stays, he said Diddy would stay in these hotels anywhere from 12 hours to days on end, and then afterwards he would clean up everything, and those included cleaning up empty bottles of liquor, empty bottles of water, empty bottles of You might guessed it, baby oil. He says that he came across a brown crystallized powder in the sink one time. He said he would have to clean up this hotel room afterwards, as opposed to having the hotel staff or the maids clean it up, because it was important to protect Diddy, and his public image was very important for him. He says that he would see hotels essentially selling photos of high-profile guests who would stay at those hotels to newspapers, and then it would be a whole thing of just this information getting out. And so that was kind of his role as far as setting up these hotels. But even as far as just some of the drugs that he procured for Diddy, it was kind of a little of a long list, as far as just kind of, there are times that he would get Molly for Diddy, or MDMA for him. But as far as just kind of how those logistics works, Jesse, that I felt like was an interesting point as well too.
Yeah, it's really illuminating, to say the least. And again, trying to tie it to the racketeering charge. He also mentioned something about how in 2015, Diddy apparently hired more security, right? What changed after that?
So it wasn't necessarily clear what the big change was. I think that's where we were kind of leading to, or at least that they were going to circle back on during his direct testimony, which will still continue on into tomorrow. But as far as just his mention of security, he said when he had first started working with Diddy and for Combs Enterprise, that he had worked, that security members included D-Rock, they included Paul, who we know to be Uncle Paulie, and they included Rue, which we know to be a security guard named Ruben. But he said around the time that he was leaving his job position, that they ended up having licensed security guards around the 2015 timeframe. And so again, they didn't go into more details about why that switch was made, but as far as just how the new security compared to the old security, he essentially said that the new security were more professional, they were more polished, they had more training to them. And I think that was an interesting point that he had made, especially since when we had heard from David James on the witness stand, he had mentioned that some of the security guards would bring over women to Diddy's home and that type of thing. But again, as far as the reason why the switch up of the security happened, we haven't gotten there just yet, but I assume that that'll definitely be asked during testimony tomorrow.
And I understand he also talked about Combs threatening him, or allegedly threatening him. What did he say?
Yeah, he said those threats would go on sometimes monthly. He said that Diddy had told them that he only wanted to be surrounded by the best, and that sometimes he would appear angry when he would say something like this, but also that he would appear motivational when saying this type of thing. But as far as even just some of the threats, one of the threats were even made while George Kaplan brought Diddy the wrong water. It was something that Diddy wanted, this alkaline water, and so what George did was he combined half a gallon of alkaline water and another half gallon of alkaline water, and then put it together to make that 1 gallon, and Diddy didn't necessarily like that. And so that was another instance that he remembered about Diddy just threatening his job essentially over fancy water.
I want to circle back about the drugs, because drugs are important in this case. On one hand, prosecutors say that the drugs were used to keep victims compliant. On the other hand, possession of drugs with intent to distribute is one of the underlying predicate crimes that the prosecution can prove in order to get to the racketeering charge. What did he say about picking up the drugs, purchasing the drugs? How did that all work out?
Yeah, it seems like drugs are kind of like a common theme, especially that the prosecution is trying to lay out, that there was just drugs essentially every day in Diddy's life. It seems that's where the prosecution is kind of going with this. But as far as George Kaplan is concerned, he said that he did pick up MDMA for Diddy after being asked to by Diddy himself. He said this instance happened, or this particular incident that he recalled happened in Miami. Diddy asked him to pick up drugs. Diddy gave him the number, I guess, of the respective drug dealer. This person came to Diddy's house who had the drugs with him. He used Diddy's money to pay for these drugs. It was MDMA, and then he would give Diddy the drugs. And he recalled this incident also happening in Los Angeles at the Bel Air Hotel with a different drug dealer that he was instructed to pick up these drugs for Diddy in Hollywood. He wasn't sure what the drug necessarily was, but he said that the money did definitely come from Diddy, and that's where court kind of ended for the day. So I assume they'll kind of pick back up, at least from the drugs, and then go into more and more kind of layers of just, I guess, whatever his testimony is expected to be tomorrow.
Oh boy, day 9 of Sean Diddy Combs' federal trial saw bombshell testimony from rapper Kid Cudi, who alleged that Diddy retaliated against him after learning that Cudi was dating Cassandra Ventura Fine, culminating in a supposed Molotov cocktail attack on Kid Cudi's car. The jury also heard disturbing accounts of abuse, secret aliases, and more details of an alleged pattern of intimidation. I'm going to be speaking with Law&Crime's reporter Elizabeth Milner to get the inside scoop on everything that the prosecution presented and everything the defense did in return. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Well, the federal trial of Sean Diddy Combs continued today, day 9, and we had explosive testimony. High-profile witness, none other than Kid Cudi himself. Yep, the rapper detailed a series of alleged retaliatory acts, including a Molotov cocktail attack on his car that he believes was orchestrated by Sean Combs because he claims Diddy found out that he was having relations with Cassandra Ventura, right? Diddy's then girlfriend, on-again, off-again girlfriend. And the jury also heard even more disturbing allegations of alleged abuse against Ventura Fine. Hotel records revealed even more about Diddy's movements, possible attempts to even obscure his whereabouts. We can see where the prosecution's going. So we're going to get into all of this. I want to bring back on, here on Sidebar, Law&Crime's reporter Elizabeth Milner, who has been inside that courtroom for every day of this action, including today. So much to get into, Elizabeth. Before we even get into Kid Cudi, just tell me, we haven't talked about it in a while, what is the atmosphere in the courtroom? Who's showing up for Diddy? And overall, what's his demeanor like?
Yeah, so when Diddy comes inside the courtroom, he's still in kind of those muted colors. He's still wearing sweaters. He still has white button-ups underneath. He still wears the slacks. Of course, he can't have a belt or have shoelaces tied to his shoes or anything like that. But as far as today's appearance goes, today Diddy was in the gray sweater, white undershirt, and gray slacks. When he comes inside the courtroom, more often than not, he's hugging his attorneys. He's kind of doing like a hand clap with them, dabbing them up, that type of thing. Then he goes over to the defense table. He essentially takes his seat. Then he's starting to kind of essentially get to work, where he's writing down notes to his attorneys. He's speaking with them, more likely to talk about what's going to be happening today and that type of thing. But as far as just who's in the courtroom, it's still a different presence than it was on the first couple of days of trial. And that today specifically, we didn't see his sons, we didn't see his daughters inside the courtroom, nor did we see his mother. However, he did have family in there, and that was, of course, being his sister Keisha, who's been in the courtroom every single day of this week. But as far as other support goes, he did have one of his childhood friends inside that courtroom too, and then possibly some of the public who are just generally fans of Diddy. The other day, I actually saw somebody in the gallery who was sitting kind of towards the back row on the public side, giving Diddy kind of a heart, and then Diddy gave the heart back because he also sometimes goes by love. And so I think he kind of appreciates the public support when he's inside the courtroom. But for the most part, he's essentially getting inside that courtroom, getting to work, and anticipating what's going to be coming of another day of trial.
It's fascinating because we do a lunch show every day, and I would say the majority of people who watch and take the polls, they think the evidence supports his conviction. They think he's guilty. I think that's a fair estimation, a lot of what we're seeing. But you also have the support for Diddy online, on social media. I think people are quite split on this, and it does become a question how much of the evidence is actually swaying their opinion. I mean, at the end of the day, it only matters about the jury. And what did the jury hear today? So they heard from Kid Cudi, okay? So when he shows up, by the way, I mean, he shows up in a leather jacket, he's wearing a white t-shirt underneath. There were pictures of him coming into the court smoking a cigarette. I mean, the guy is like a superstar. He comes right in, A-list celebrity. Now, people might be saying, what is his connection to this case? He did come up during Cassandra Ventura's testimony, so let's talk about this. He gets on the stand, okay? 2 questions for you. First of all, let's take it piece by piece. What did he say about how he first got involved with Cassandra Ventura and what the relationship was like? And what was his overall demeanor like?
Well, when he was inside the courtroom, he was super casual. I will say, Jesse, that when when the government was calling his name as the next witness to come to the stand, I will say most of the people inside that courtroom, with the exception of the defense table, the prosecutors, everyone just turned around in their seat to get a look of Kid Cudi walking inside that courtroom. I'm telling you, everybody's back was turned to see him go inside that courtroom, take the witness stand. So there was a lot of anticipation for his testimony today, especially from us in the media, as well as probably people who are just general fans of Kid Cudi. So yes, to your point, Jesse, he is very casual even while on the stand, and he appeared casual while testifying today. He did have that black motorcycle jacket. He had his earring in. He had a white t-shirt on. He had jeans on and just walked up to the witness stand as, you know, this was just any other day. But you could tell that this is something he doesn't do very often as far as, you know, testifying in a federal courtroom. And because he would say things like one-liners that were a little funny, and then he would say things like, "What you say now?" And it's just like, it was so casual while on the stand, and it was a little funny at times. But just as far as his involvement in the case, he's been a name that a lot of people have been hearing multiple times since testimony began, but they're not hearing Kid Cudi. What they're hearing is Scott Mescudi, his real name, his government name, I should say. But as far as his connection to the case, he and Cassie started off as friends together. Then they were going to start working together on this song. Diddy kind of try to set that up for them so that way Cassie could have a song with Kid Cudi. But the two became close, and the two I'm talking about, of course, being Kid Cudi and Cassie Ventura. They became close and romantically close as well, too. So as far as his involvement in the case, he said he dated Cassie back in 2011, something we knew from Cassie's testimony as well, too. And he said that he knew around that time that Cassie and Diddy had some problems, but he said that they weren't dating at that time. That's what his understanding was of their entire situation. So then as we're getting into the exhibits, they do show a photo of Capricorn Clark, and she kind of plays a role into it, and I'll get into that in just a second. But we see a photo exhibit of Capricorn Clark, a photo exhibit that we've seen a number of times. And Kid Cudi said that she was a friend of Cassie's. Didn't even necessarily mention that she also worked for Diddy. I think he kind of slipped that in at the end, but really the focus was that she was a friend of Cassie's. Now we get into December of 2011. This is around the time that Cassie and Kid Cudi are dating one another. But police came to Kid Cudi's home because he had a break-in at his home. And it was really interesting kind of how he was just explaining from his side of the story, just about all the events that occurred. So he said that day actually started with a call from Cassie around 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and Diddy had found out that the two were dating one another, and Cassie sounded really stressed on this phone call. So what Kid Cudi did was he went and picked up Cassie. He took her to a hotel, the Sunset Marquis in California, to make sure that she was in a safe place and away from Diddy, essentially, because she just sounded so stressed and nervous during this phone call. Kid Cudi, again, at the time, didn't even realize that she was still kind of dealing with him, she being Cassie, still dealing with Diddy. And so Diddy had asked, I guess, for Kid Cudi's address, and I think this was a point that the defense later drove home, was that Cassie was the one who gave Diddy Kid Cudi's address. And so Kid Cudi said that he didn't know what Diddy was necessarily going to do. So when they were at the hotel, he actually spoke to Capricorn Clark on the phone. He said, as far as Capricorn Clark's connection to it, that Capricorn hung out with Kid Cudi and Cassie a lot of times. That's what Kid Cudi had said on the stand. But during this particular phone call, Capricorn sounded scared and kind of on the verge of fear because Sean Combs, aka Diddy, one of his affiliates, who we don't know the name of this other person, and Capricorn Clark were actually at Kid Cudi's house while Kid Cudi wasn't even there. So that means that Diddy was inside Kid Cudi's home, according to Kid Cudi, during this incident. So Kid Cudi actually went home after he got this call from Capricorn Clark, and then we see an exhibit photo of Kid Cudi's old home, a home where the break-in had occurred, and we see the front door gate. And he describes this neighborhood as like quiet and family-oriented, not thinking that break-ins really happen in this particular neighborhood. And so he actually ends up getting on the phone with Diddy while he's driving back and rushing back to his home. And Kid Cudi, he, was very casual on the stand, and by casual, he also used a lot of profanity on the stand as well, too. So he said, "Mother effer," you know what I mean? "Are you in my house?" Diddy responded, "I just want to talk to you." And these are Kid Cudi's words. It's not like we heard a voice note or anything like that. This is what Kid Cudi had recalled about this entire situation. But Diddy had responded, "I'm here waiting for you," here being at Kid Cudi's home. And surprisingly, and this is something Kid Cudi had said, that Diddy sounded pretty calm on the phone while this was happening. So he gets home, he sees the security cameras aren't adjusted the way that they normally are. They're turned down as if somebody had moved them. They're turned in the opposite angle. And Kid Cudi said he wasn't the one that moved those security cameras. So when he got home, his suspicion alarms just ran and ran and ran, because he said that gifts were open on his kitchen counter. It was stuff from Chanel. He said his dog was in the bathroom at this time, and his dog normally, just like a lot of our pets, just runs free around the home whenever the pet parent isn't at home or isn't present. But his dog in this particular incident was shut behind a bathroom door. And he had this dog for a 2-year time period, even prior to this incident. And he noticed that his dog's behavior started to change after this break-in, that the dog became jittery and was on edge all the time. And Kid Cudi got back into his car and called Diddy because he was looking for him. He wanted to fight him. He was that mad, he says. And so after the phone call, or after he was trying to look for Diddy to essentially possibly beat him up, Kid Cudi said he kind of thought about the situation, the reality and gravity of what could be another situation. So what he ended up doing was he actually called the police. He returned home, and by the time he had returned home after looking for Diddy, the police were there, and he had filed a police report about this break-in incident.
And what's interesting about it is, because I think obviously it goes to a number of factors. So the idea that Capricorn Clark made the allegation, right, that she was taken by Sean Combs and an affiliate to Kid Cudi's place, that goes to what? Kidnapping, one of the alleged predicate crimes for racketeering. The more that establishes that he was, breaking into his home, goes to this pattern of criminal activity. Again, the jury has to digest the fact that Sean Combs was a leader of a criminal enterprise for racketeering. And I think that this is essential for it. But now we go into something else, right? Now we go into the allegation that Sean Combs had blown up Kid Cudi's car. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, it was something that we have kind of known about for a while now, right? Because it was actually laid out in Cassie's federal lawsuit, which we know was filed one day, settled the next day, back in November of 2023. But as far as this arson goes, this Molotov cocktail inside Kid Cudi's Porsche, this happened on January 9th of 2016. So it was just about a week or two after he and Cassie had even broken up. And so he said that he was over at his ex-girlfriend's sister's house at this time, and he got a call from his dog's babysitter, or his dog sitter at the time, and got a call that his car was on fire and it caught fire. And so Kid Cudi on the stand said, "She told me my car was on fire. I immediately went to my house." So he gets to his house, he sees his car in the driveway, and then that's when we see a bunch of exhibit photos. And this was kind of the first time I think that we've really seen just the damage of the car and what it really entailed in the aftermath of this Molotov cocktail being lodged into Kid Cudi's car. So we saw photos of the damaged car. We saw kind of a cut open roof from the Molotov cocktail. The roof was blown out. And according to Kid Cudi, the person who took those photos wasn't Kid Cudi himself. It was actually Kid Cudi's best friend, Chip, who had taken these photos. And so we see more exhibit photos of the burnt driver's side door, with all the smoke damage. We see a hole in the roof again. We see the damage to the driver's side again with the burned seats. And then Kid Cudi said that when he arrived home, he did see the damage, but he also saw the burnt bottle, aka the Molotov cocktail, on the ground outside of the car. He said it was kind of lodged on the driver's side of the car. And he said when he had arrived home as well too, that police were at his home and his car wasn't even able to be repaired after the fire. And he was asked about his reaction by prosecutor Emily Johnson, and his reaction was, "What the F-U-C-K?" And so that was just kind of another moment of Kid Cudi, even though it's a serious situation, but still coming off just relatively casual just about the entire incident. And I thought what was interesting is, because right after Kid Cudi gave his reaction, we went to a little break, that Diddy's demeanor really kind of, it was very just kind of, from what I could tell, just kind of emotionless. Like he didn't seem like he thought it was funny or anything like that, which was kind of a stark reaction from when the previous witness, that being George Kaplan, took the stand, where Diddy was laughing at some of the testimony, all of that stuff. But with Kid Cudi specifically today, Jesse, Diddy had little to no reaction from what I could tell from where I was sitting, just about everything, because when Kid Cudi's kind of alleging that this might have been at the hands of Sean Combs, I think, Sean Combs knows that the jury is kind of listening very closely to these types of allegations.
It's damning testimony, because not only does it help support, as I mentioned, kidnapping, then it helps support arson, right? Arson, one of the other underlying predicate crimes for racketeering. Prosecution just needs to prove at least 2. Now talk to me about this. Kid Cudi confronted Diddy, right?
there was definitely a confrontation that happened shortly after the Molotov cocktail was inside Kid Cudi's car. And I thought, just kind of circling back really quick, Jesse, is that he was actually asked, do you think that this was accidental or do you think this was intentional? And Kid Cudi said that he had believed that this was intentional. And so what ended up happening is that he said that Diddy was reaching out to him and texting him and calling him a number of times. And Kid Cudi was just so furious essentially around this time that he just wasn't answering, he wasn't responding, but he just wanted essentially the drama to stop. And so he ended up reaching out to Diddy after his car caught fire because he had told Diddy that this is getting out of hand. And so what ended up happening was D-Rock, a name that we have been hearing about a number of times, one of Diddy's then security guards, and then Kid Cudi's manager Dennis had set up this meeting so that way Diddy and Kid Cudi could talk and hash things out. And so this meeting happened in Los Angeles at Soho House, something that they actually have here in New York City as well too. And Kid Cudi had said when he arrived, he met with D-Rock, who escorted him up into a room. And this is where there was kind of a little light moment of laughter, but maybe from Diddy's point of view, he didn't think it was that funny. But Kid Cudi said while on the stand that when he got into this room where he was supposed to meet Diddy, that Diddy was just kind of staring off and he looked like a Marvel supervillain, a point that a lot of people in the courtroom were laughing about, as well as some of the jurors. But did Diddy particularly think it's funny? Possibly not. But Kid Cudi had said that Diddy's demeanor for the most part appeared calm during this meetup. And Kid Cudi said that was actually a little off-putting to him because he said it was weird that he was acting so calm. He said that later Cassie ended up arriving to this meeting and that he was a little upset with Cassie because she didn't think that she was going to go back to him. And so during this meeting, Kid Cudi said that he didn't have conflict with anyone else at this time. So I think he kind of pointed it at this being kind of Sean Combs' fault that his car got blown up essentially. But he said after this meeting and after they kind of talked things through and hashed things out, that Kid Cudi and Diddy stood up, they shook each other's hand, and Kid Cudi said to Diddy, "What are we going to do about my car?" And Diddy responded, "I don't know what you're talking about." And Kid Cudi said that he had said this kind of relatively calmly. But after this meeting, there were no more break-ins in Kid Cudi's home. There were no more car bombs lodged into his car or Molotov cocktails. And after, he didn't see Diddy again until a few years later, surprisingly, at Soho House once again. And Diddy surprisingly apologized later on. And Kid Cudi had said that after he received the apology years later from Diddy, he said he kind of made peace with the entire situation. And so that was kind of the wrap up of his direct testimony. Obviously, with the cross, there were some holes poked in it here and there, but we'll definitely talk about that.
Before we even get into the cross, what exactly was the apology? What exactly did Combs apologize for?
From Kid Cudi's testimony today, he said that he was at Soho House, again, this being years after the Molotov cocktail, that he ran into Diddy there and Diddy was with his daughters. And essentially Diddy had said that he was just sorry for everything, not going into much detail, not a point where he said, "I was the one who had did this, I'm the one behind it," nothing like that. But essentially he just said that the apology was pretty quick, brief, and that he had moved on from the situation afterwards.
Did Kid Cudi testify about Diddy's alleged abuse of Cassie?
Well, that really was kind of touched upon during the cross-examination, the cross being presented by Brian Still, who we all know very well here at Law&Crime. But as far as what Kid Cudi said during the cross-examination, he said that Cassie never told him about sexual abuse. He said that he was in love with Cassie while the two were together, and that Kid Cudi actually never saw Diddy hit Cassie around this time. But another point that I think Brian Still was trying to point out during this testimony, during the cross-examination, is that Diddy never interrupted Kid Cudi and Cassie when they were together. And Kid Cudi said, "Yeah, that's pretty true." Then they started kind of talking about the burner phones and whether or not Cassie had told Kid Cudi that she had multiple phones, because while Cassie was on the stand, she did own up to the fact that she did have a burner phone, so that way Diddy wouldn't get mad or angry at her. And so when asked, "Did you tell the government that Cassie had multiple phones?" Kid Cudi said, "I can't remember, but if I said it, I said it." A little moment where people are laughing in the courtroom. But then they kind of ended on the cross-examination as far as just, again, driving the point home that this and I hate to say it this way, that it might have been Cassie's fault for pointing Diddy to his home, because Cassie was the one that gave Diddy Kid Cudi's address, according to testimony today. So I think as far as just the big points of the cross-examination, it felt like they were kind of turning this to Cassie's fault, and this was Cassie's the reason that this had happened, because she was the one that gave the address to Diddy.
And also trying to say, you know, she was the one who played you, like she played Combs, like she's the manipulative one. She's the one who can't be trusted. And I think that's something that they've been building up a lot, talking about the her filing a lawsuit against Combs, and that she might have ulterior motives, and, you know, the burner phones. And that could be a dangerous strategy, but it's an interesting strategy nonetheless. And, you know, focusing on the fact that she said she never told Kid Cudi that she was sexually abused, which is a key component of the prosecution's case. And I also understand they asked a little bit more about, was there further investigation into the essential firebombing of your car. He was also asked about DNA, I think. And so I could see where they were going with the cross-examination, but the points were well heard by Kid Cudi's testimony. So now I want to move into the other testimony. And I actually want to backtrack, because the day started with the continued testimony of George Kaplan, right? Diddy's former assistant. Very important in a racketeering case. If you're going to be talking about racketeering in a criminal enterprise, and that Combs used his businesses and his resources and his employees and his staff to further criminal activity and cover things up, you got to get the inner circle to testify. Now, my understanding is he testified about some specific violent incidents, right? What did he describe?
Yeah, so George Kaplan, when we see him inside the courtroom today, he was wearing an olive-colored green suit. He had no tie on. He's kind of looking around waiting for the jury. But as far as just my impression of him while he was on the stand, you could tell that he still had love for Diddy, who used to be his former boss. And it was just kind of an interesting moment, but he had recalled just two incidents about why he essentially quit his job. And the first one happened in 2015, where he was on Diddy's private jet, because again, Diddy has a lot of money, so he's able to have his own private jet. And they were flying to Las Vegas because Diddy had a club appearance during this time. And so they're on Diddy's private jet. It's not just Diddy and Cassie, but there are other people there too. George was there, security was there, management was there, and then other team members of Diddy's were there as well too. So George said that he was sitting kind of at a table towards the back of the plane, but Cassie and Diddy themselves were behind this partition, kind of also towards the back of the plane. And then all of a sudden, George heard glass breaking. So he said when he had heard this glass breaking, he saw Cassie on her back on the floor, and Diddy was above her. Diddy was holding this whiskey rock glass, and George said that there was tremendous commotion, and Cassie was screaming, essentially saying, "Isn't anyone seeing this?" And George said that he did nothing in this situation. He didn't de-escalate the situation. He didn't try to help Cassie. He just looked away. Cassie said, again, "Isn't anyone seeing this?" And nobody on that plane did anything to help her. So George said he was around 23 around the time when he was asked why he didn't do anything. He said he was young. He couldn't believe that he was working for an icon around this time. And again, just kind of throughout his testimony today was really just kind of driving home the point that Diddy was such an icon, gave him his first major opportunity, and he was just so proud to be working with Diddy around this time. And so he said that he was trying to accomplish something professionally, and by speaking up and speaking out against his boss, that he wouldn't be able to accomplish this. And so Diddy told Cassie during this incident to stay in the back of the plane. Nobody again checked on her. The flight was about an hour long, according to George, and Diddy again going to that club appearance. So what George's role was in the situation after was he was to bring Cassie to the club later on. He said he didn't see any bruising on Cassie in this particular incident, but did recall another incident where she was bruised in 2015. In that particular incident, Cassie was crying on the bed. She had bruising above her right eyebrow. And George said that he was in the room for less than 3 seconds before Diddy went in, and Diddy asked him to get him ointments like a witch hazel cream to kind of get rid of the bruising. But as far as the plane incident specifically, he said that he didn't see bruising on Cassie during that incident, and nor did anyone help her during that incident. But his role after the fact was to get Cassie help get Cassie from the hotel essentially to the club, so that way she could meet Diddy during his club appearance and appear that everything was all good after this pretty shocking incident.